Hello guys, today we'll be exploring the shocking discovery that archaeologists made when they broke into a forbidden chamber in Pompeii. Have you ever heard of Pompeii? If you haven't, here's the story. Pompeii is an ancient Roman city that was destroyed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. The eruption was so massive that it buried the city under layers of ash and pumice, preserving its buildings and artifacts for centuries. This city has been rediscovered by researchers who are unraveling new mysteries daily. Well, there's more. It'll interest you to know that forbidden chambers have been discovered in this lost city. Do you want to know what secrets these forbidden rooms contain, or why are the rooms forbidden? Then grab a seat and continue watching this video. We will answer your questions and shock you with archaeologists' fantastic discovery in Pompeii's forbidden chamber. While exploring the Italian countryside in 1748, a group of explorers made an incredible discovery. Surprisingly, as they walked, they noticed that the ground was covered in ash and debris. Curious, they began to dig, and to their amazement, they unearthed a long-lost city, Pompeii. But why was the city under the ground? Pompeii had been buried for centuries, lost to the world after the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. The ash and lava from the eruption had covered the city, preserving it perfectly in time. On the day of the eruption, a massive column of ash and lava spewed from the volcano, raining down on the city below and burying it under a thick layer of ash. As you would expect, the people of Pompeii tried to flee, but it was too late. The ash and lava were everywhere, engulfing everything in its path. As the ash settled, the city of Pompeii was left in ruins, and many of its residents were killed by the eruption. Little did we know that it would take centuries before the city would be rediscovered, and that the story of the fateful eruption of Mount Vesuvius would later become a site of wonder for us this year. As the researchers continued their exploration, they discovered that the Pompeii residents' bodies were frozen, as though they had just been trapped in the explosion. It was a haunting sight, and the explorers were filled with awe as they realized the full extent of the disaster that had befallen the city. Interestingly, Pompeii is not just a sad reminder of a catastrophe that had already happened. It was also a goldmine of knowledge and proof regarding ancient Roman life. The city was perfectly preserved, with buildings, artifacts, and even paintings still intact. Because of this volcanic eruption, explorers were able to learn more about the daily lives of the people of Pompeii and get a clearer picture of how people used to live in this ancient city. Archaeologists also discovered a forbidden chamber with many findings that point to life in Pompeii. Spooky, right? But before we talk about the forbidden chamber, let me take you on a little journey back in time and show you what life was like in Pompeii before the eruption. What was life like in Pompeii? How were slaves treated in ancient Pompeii and the Roman Empire? Imagine the flooring scenario. In case you were wondering, Pompeii was a bustling Roman city. It was filled with merchants, artisans, and slaves. The slaves in Pompeii, like those in the Roman Empire as a whole, came from a variety of backgrounds. Some were captured in wars and sold into slavery, while others were born into slavery. One such slave was a young man called Marcus, which I'll tell you more about. Marcus had been born into slavery on a farm outside of Pompeii. He'd never known his parents and had been raised by the farm's owner. Marcus worked on the farm from a very young age, tending to the animals and helping with the harvest. When Marcus turned 18, he was sold to a wealthy merchant in Pompeii. The merchant owned a shop selling luxury goods, and Marcus worked for him as a servant. He cleaned the shop, ran errands, and assisted the merchant with his business. Like many slaves in Pompeii, Marcus worked long hours and was paid very little. He was given a small room in the back of the shop to sleep in and just enough food to ensure he did not starve. Marcus had no rights and could be beaten or punished at the whim of his owner. Can you imagine? Despite the harsh conditions, Marcus never relented. He was a hard worker and took pride in his duties. He also tried to learn as much as he could from the merchant, hoping that one day he might be able to use his skills to gain his freedom. This story might have had a better ending, but unfortunately Marcus's hopes were shattered when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. The city of Pompeii was buried under a thick layer of ash, and Marcus was trapped in the shop with his owner. Both were killed in the eruption, their bodies preserved for centuries in the ash. Sadly, Marcus's story is just one of many slaves who lived and worked in Pompeii in the Roman Empire. These slaves worked as craftsmen, farmers, and household servants. We can say that their labor helped to build and maintain the Roman Empire. But even with all their hard work, they had no wealth, property, or the freedom to do what they wanted. Consequently, ancient Rome depended heavily on slave labor. No other ancient city owned as many slaves as the Romans did. In fact, slave labor was standard practice across the Mediterranean region. Rome used slaves, mostly Italian Slavs, increasing its territory and power at the expense of the neighboring Italian peoples. Most of the enslaved people were Italian. Most slaves were captured by war, and we dare say that most wars were motivated by the need to capture slaves for the Roman Empire. As you would guess, places like Pompeii became immensely rich because of the loot they got from the war and the slave trade. Many slaves were also secured by piracy, by kidnapping even on the streets of Rome, as well as on the highways. In other cases, the children of mothers who were slaves became slaves in their turn, property of whoever owned the mother. If Marcus got married while being a slave and had a kid, that child would become enslaved when they grew up. As foreign conquests ceased during the later empire, the children of slaves became a primary source of supply. This was the only way the horror of slavery would continue. At some point, although it was illegal, some enslaved freeborn Romans. As you can see, slaves and the slave trade were common things back then in Pompeii, and the recently discovered forbidden chambers opened up a lot of findings into the city of Pompeii and the life of slaves back then. You must know that Marcus's story is just one of many that talk about the life of slaves in the Roman Empire. Rome was a big center for slaves and the slave trade. Many slaves, just like Marcus, had to live in secret chambers around the masters to answer their call. Gabriel Zuchtriegel, the manager of the Pompeii Archaeological Park, says that the discovery of the Forbidden Chamber is a window to the precarious reality of people who appear in the historical sources. With hidden truths discovered, archaeologists found many secret chambers where slaves lived in Pompeii. These forbidden chambers, like many others, had many things in common. Want to know what? Stay tuned. What did archaeologists find in these forbidden chambers? They discovered a hidden room that had 3 wooden beds, as well as other antiquities such as jars, pitchers, and a chamber pot. They concluded that slaves who lived there were under Roman laws and considered to be properties of others, not people. The researchers also found a ceremonial carriage and the remains of horses by the stables. They found a wooden chest with metal and fabric pieces that could have been part of the harnesses for the horses on top of the slaves' beds. This could only mean that the slaves must have taken care of the stables. Totally makes sense, right? They had to be close to stables to ensure their masters rode on clean horses daily. But is that it? What more archaeological findings did the researchers make? They also discovered that 2 beds were 1.7 meters long, while the last one was 1.4 meters long and probably meant for a child. Dario Franceschini, Italy's culture minister, deduced that an enslaved family resided in that room. A family of slaves? Now that's a bummer. According to representatives from the Archaeological Park of Pompeii, the chamber operated as a dormitory and a storage space. Not only did the slaves have to live here, but they also had to store things in these rooms. Now, we understand why there were so many artifacts in these forbidden rooms. Dario Franceschini, Italy's culture minister, said that this forbidden chamber was an important discovery that gives us more insight into the daily life of slaves in ancient Pompeii. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. Amid artifacts under the layer of ash, the recently discovered forbidden chamber opens the way for many discoveries and history. Archaeologists are looking for more discoveries to acknowledge the ancient life of Pompeii citizens, and with time, learn more about the lost history of Pompeii and ancient Rome. What are your thoughts so far on the discoveries of the Forbidden Chamber? Is there more to life in Pompeii than we ever realized? What more discoveries could we find out? Let's hear your views in the comment section below and subscribe for more content like this.